Hello, and welcome to Immigration Talk, a space where we hear from an expert on matters related to the immigration industry, law and policy, and practice. I'm Rosalie Van Staldeinen, and joining me is immigration lawyer Joel Sandaluk. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Joel, how would you advise a client who has received a Canadian citizenship certificate cancellation notice from the Government of Canada?
This is something that's happened relatively recently. So, when the Citizenship Act was amended in December 15th, 2025, a number of applications for citizenship certificates made by Canadian citizens born abroad were filed, some of those being filed on an urgent basis. And it seems like a number of those certificates that were filed urgently may have been issued in error. The error, for the most part, seems to be that the underlying documentary evidence was not an official government record, which although it was permitted according to the online instructions at the time, has since been amended as a requirement. So what's happened is that a number of citizenship certificates were issued that the government now wishes to cancel and have returned to them so that they can then be destroyed and then have citizenship assessed again. What we've been seeing is that a number of those cancellation notices have been coming in. We can treat them as procedural fairness letters, essentially. What we do is sit down with our client and we ask them a few sort of key questions. First, we want to see a copy of the material that was actually submitted in the first place in order to try and figure out what may have been problematic about it. What often is problematic is that people would have submitted documents that were prepared for genealogy purposes or that were not issued by official government offices, and that then those documents were provided, urgent processing was requested, and a certificate was issued. So usually instead of simply returning the certificate, what we'll do is obtain the official documentary evidence. Now, in a perfect world, those documents would really just be restricted to birth certificates. A birth certificate showing each individual and their parents going back to an ancestor who was born in Canada. That really is the best type of evidence. However, we have to recognize that in not every case can we provide that evidence. So, for example, in the province of Quebec, for many, many years, official records were kept not by the government, but by religious organizations. So rather than a birth certificate, we might have a baptismal certificate, a marriage certificate, a confirmation certificate, something that was issued by the Catholic Church, sometimes by a mosque or a synagogue, depending on the individual. So that's something that we have to deal with. And we also have to provide an explanation as to why that is being provided rather than an official government record. There are other types of issues that can arise as well. So, for example, Canada being bilingual, many immigrants came to Canada using languages that were not the English or French language. So, for example, people who were using the Greek alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet, Chinese alphabet, their names were translated by either English or French officers. And depending the first language of the officer who they encountered, their names could have been translated differently. Sometimes when those individuals then left Canada and traveled to a different country, like the United States, for example, their names changed yet again. So, for example, a name like Cohen, Cohen, which is a very common Jewish name in Quebec, when that individual emigrated from Canada to the United States, in many cases, their name was changed to Cohen, Cohn, which was an English spelling of the same name. And usually where there's that kind of distinction, it's important to provide some kind of an explanation, simply for the officer to understand that it's the same individual using different spellings of the same name. So beyond those kinds of issues, it's very important to make sure everything is clear, everything lines up. Now, obviously, once we also get that information provided to immigration, we will also try to obtain some kind of evidence as to why the citizenship certificate was requested in the first place. There are a lot of reasons that people want to request their certificates. Sometimes it's for personal interest or research in one's family history. Sometimes it's to prevent enforcement action against them in Canada. Sometimes it's to access medical care or education. So if there is some urgency or some importance to having that citizenship certificate, we'll provide that information to Immigrate or to Citizenship Canada as well, and explain that the individual will be profoundly prejudiced if the certificate is canceled. So by treating that cancellation notice as a procedural fairness letter rather than simply as a direction, we're often able to ensure that our clients are able to maintain their documents. Their citizenship, of course, is never in question. Their citizenship is not being revoked. It's only their proof of citizenship. But allowing them to continue to use those documents, as well as any documents that are issued on the basis of those certificates. So, for example, a social insurance number, a passport, anything can be critically important. So it's very important when you get that notice or when you see somebody bring that notice to your office that you look at it with an open mind and you don't see it simply as a direction and then decide that you'll have to submit a new certificate application, which may take months to process. But rather, if you can provide the information that you think should have been provided in the first place, you can resolve the issue and the registrar can essentially cancel the cancellation of a certificate and leave your client in the position that they should have been in the first place.
Well, thank you, Joel, for these timely insights and suggestions on how to approach these cancellation notices. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Let's talk again.